we're going to take a trip down to the Big Easy, which actually ended up being the Big Hard. And that is, of course, talking about the New Orleans Saints. So for the Saints, last 2021, they went 9-8. They nearly eked out a wild card spot. Almost took that away from the San Francisco 49ers. But, they lost out due to tiebreakers and stuff. So for the Saints, they were beginning a completely new era in 2022. Drew Brees already retired after the 2020 season, and you had longtime head coach Sean Payne step down 2 weeks after the 2021 season ended. So in came in defensive coordinator Dennis Allen, getting promoted to head coach. But obviously, when I talked about Dennis Allen when I was previewing the Saints season, I had plenty of questions. Despite having a solid roster when it came to Dennis Allen, because when Dennis Allen was coaching the Oakland Raiders, he didn't exactly do that well during his tenure. He went, I think, an abysmal 2-14. He had a really bad losing record, and I think he only lasted a season and a half, if I remember correctly. Someone back me up on that. So you had some questions on how he would fare in his second coaching gig. And you also had questions about when Jameis Winston and receiver Michael Thomas would be healthy enough to play coming off their injuries. Jameis Winston coming off a torn ACL, and Michael Thomas, he's been battling like leg injuries like for the last season and a half. So a lot of questions for the Saints to answer. And, a lot of those questions were actually answered only a month in. For the Saints, they looked good on both ends on offense in the first game of the Falcons. Winston looked productive. He looked like the same productive version that he was prior to the ACL injury the season prior. And Michael Thomas, he looks pretty solid, shaking off that rust. He was Winston's preferred receiver in what was a fourth quarter comeback against Atlanta. And then you had others like Taysom Hill, Jarvis Landry, Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara producing as well. And when you look at the Saints in that game, it seemed like they could have been an offensively solid team. But then you remember, it was only week 1. Because after that game, Winston reverted back to throwing interceptions and against the Bucs and the Panthers. And then when you look at it, a good reason for that was, he was playing through back fractures that he suffered in that first game against the Falcons. So that affected his ability to throw. So, and here comes Andy Dalton that would take over the starting spot from week 4 onwards. And, let's just say that he didn't play terrible, but he also didn't play great. He was just very mid. The play was so conservative that it pretty much limited the offense. It was limited to just checkdowns, occasional mid-range and deep ball throws. Pretty much, plays like expected from Andy Dalton at in his mid-30s. So, like I said, it pretty much limited what the offense was able to do, especially when they were playing from behind. When the Saints were playing from behind, it's not the best situation you want to be in. So, on a positive note, though, their defense kept them in a good amount of the games, especially when you have players like Cameron Jordan, Marcus Davenport, and linebacker Demario Davis, and new safety Tyrann Mathieu. But the problem was the offense. It's an offense-driven league, and when the offense is capped at the ceiling with Andy Dalton, it would undo you in those very tight games. And they also had a lot of injuries to a good amount of its key players that did them in. You only had Michael Thomas for 3 games. Starting corners Marshawn Lattimore and Bradley Roby missed a good amount of time. Lattimore didn't come back until week 17 when they beat the Eagles. So they were missing a good amount of key players. So for the Saints, even despite all of that, they actually were still in the fight for the NFC South because they were playing in a putrid, crappy division. That is the NFC South, thanks primarily to the Bucs being total dog shit. So the Saints actually had as much of an opportunity to steal it, but again, they weren't that great. They weren't terrible either, but it was just their problems that I already talked about. It just didn't help them at all. And, they got a upset win over the Eagles, albeit they didn't have Jalen Hurts, but after what happened already around the league, they were already eliminated from playoff contention for the second straight year, and they ended their season at 7-10. So overall, they had a very limited ceiling in 2022, especially offensively. But at least, rookie receiver Chris Olave looked pretty good, pretty efficient. But the problem was, other than that offense did not look great. Did not. It was pretty capped when you had Andy Dalton at the helm, and you didn't even bother. Dennis Allen didn't really bother to try Jameis Winston, even when he was already fully healthy again. After I think it was week 6 when he was fully healthy, ready to go. Not even a hinge. So now the Saints are kind of in that purgatory. They're not bad, but they're not good either. They're in that neutral zone of, well, shit, we're kind of stuck here. And that's kind of going to continue for perhaps even next season, which sucks for them, especially considering their offseason. It's what can they even really do? What can the Saints really even do? They're way in the red with their cap space. They're at this time, they're $44 million over the cap. So they owe a lot of money. And how are they going to restructure some of their contracts? And they have a couple of key free agents like Marcus Davenport, Jarvis Landry, Bradley Roby, backup running back Mark Ingram. So it's if they want to keep any of them, it's how are you going to plan to? And I think Jameis Winston is also a free agent. So man, it's how are you going to what are you going to do here? And some of the things that you have to address in free agency and the draft is well, the first thing you got to do is find a way to get under the salary cap. Again, you got to work that magic, man. So after you do that, it's you got to find some cheap defensive linemen to re-strengthen that pass rush. Like I said, you're probably going to lose Marcus Davenport, and at this point, you got to find something in the draft to rebolster that pass rush. And then I'm going to retract the Jameis Winston thing because he actually has one more year left on his deal, and thus the Saints just outright release him. But maybe the Saints can use their second round pick on a quarterback, whatever is good on day 2, to compete with Jameis Winston, because, well, it's you can't really sign anybody on the open market. Andy Dalton's a free agent. Jimmy Garoppolo, for example, is going to be, for some reason, overpriced as hell. So just bring in a quarterback, second round. Maybe he'll pan out. Hopefully. So for the Saints, it wasn't an entirely bad 2022, but again, they were just mid. They were pretty mediocre, just very meh with a couple of positives. The problem now is they don't have a first round pick because they owe that to the Philadelphia Eagles, at least a top first round pick. They have a late first round pick, but they don't have the original first round pick. And they're still in the red. They are still in the red with money. It's going to make them hard to address a lot of their needs in the offseason. So honestly, I can again foresee things getting not just big hard, but even bigger hard, like San Quentin hard, like that movie Get Hard. So it's going to get really big hard, and then not so easy for the Saints. Not just this offseason, but maybe even the next couple of off seasons, if we're looking at it right now.